Hi, so I'm Megan Bernal, and I do work in the library. I have a very long title. I don't usually teach classes at the university, so we're about to present on a unique collaboration that we did. It's not necessarily super scalable, but it was a great experiment. So to get us started, I'm going to first kind of lay the groundwork about the library at DePaul. DePaul is an urban university in Chicago. We're not a Research One institution. We don't have a lot of PhD programs, but we do have a lot of students. So the library at the Lincoln Park campus in Chicago is undergoing a multi-phase, multi-million-dollar renovation right now. And last fall, we opened the first floor of a very InfoCommons type environment. So these are some photos from that opening from that time. Still looks like this. The idea was to have flexible, scalable, but you still see some heavy wood there, don't you? It is a library. People are able to bring their own technology, a lot of wireless, a lot of plugs, a lot of different types of furniture to move around in different rooms. One of the rooms that we did design, and this kind of resonates for those of you who were here this morning and heard the presentation from Columbia University, we did kind of make a space called the Scholars Lab, but it isn't a traditional lab, and our initial idea was that teaching and learning could go on in this space. But it is quite open. We've kind of left it open because we want to know more about the needs on campus. So this is the space that Professor Shanahan and I decided to use for an English capstone course. And what you see in the photo is what we're calling collaboration tables. They include a screen where you can project a computer. And in the middle, there's a well, and there's a bunch of different cords where you can kind of attach any device, you know, an iPad, a laptop computer, different types of computers. And then there's pucks, and you can switch and kind of look at things collaboratively together. So that's the idea. Additionally, there's a podium, just like I'm standing at right now, overhead projector, big whiteboards, some unique oversized printing equipment, but that's about it. That's really all that it is. So in terms of kind of non-infrastructure hardware side, the library has, for some time at DePaul, had a digitization service. We use Content DM at DePaul. We also use the bPress platform for our information commons. We've had these services for years, but they became of interest to a group on campus interested in the digital humanities because there's interest in scanning, among other things, in scholarly communication, electronic publishing. So many people have had slides like this all day, but these were the types of skill sets that we've had in the library for quite some time. They tend to be under my unit in information technology and cataloging. So these were some of the things that were of interest to Professor Shanahan and why he approached me about teaching this class. So I'll turn it over to him. Sure.
All right, so yeah, I work on literature and science. I'm an early modernist actually by training, and I feel like I'm also one of those people just young enough to appreciate the digital humanities and its fascination to me, and just old enough to not to have been trained in it in graduate school, finishing in 2002. So I've been for a long time trying to find ways to get more of these skills into what my students do, both undergraduates and master's students. And I took quite literally, since I work on literature and science, the idea of it being a lab, a scholar's lab, and influenced by Latour and science studies and things, I started to think about, what is this space as a lab? And Latour's great insights are about the way labs destabilize things, making what's strong weak, what's weak strong, makes the far away seem near, vice versa, all these kinds of things. So just thinking through what would it be like to take an English class and really think of it as a lab with people working at the bench and all that kind of collaborative thing that, again, is a truism now in DH, but it has not been in my department. There's no one trained to do anything with DH, so at least for my kind of school, maybe yours too, you have to go outside your department. And I was happy to work with the librarians and bring some skill sets in that we don't have. So we wrote up an application for an award for this, and actually won an Innovative Teaching Award, which got us a little bit of funds extra to use on things. And we kind of threw everything at the wall, to try to get students involved. We'll say something, maybe this will be questions at the end, but one of the things we learned is not to do this as a capstone at the end of an English major. I thought of it as, wow, they're on their way out. This is supposed to be a kind of synthetic course that points them, out to their careers beyond their bachelor's degree in English. And so it's a chance to give them some tools, but it became immediately clear, one, that you can't spring all this on them in their last quarter. And so I guess, the big takeaway is these are things that need to be parceled out over, several courses earlier. And some of the things we tried to do, this is, everything from SEO fundamentals and just sort of thinking through keywords. And if you've seen the latest issue of Representations, you'll know that there's a fascinating article about even things as seemingly different from English departments as keyword searching and things like that. But anyway, here's some students working at the tables. And actually, I guess I'll just say a few things here just with some slides, what we tried to get. And I thought of it as a way of looking at media interfaces over time and then trying to embed in some digital skills. So taking things like, that I feel most comfortable in, the printing variants in Shakespeare and things, and working up through the fact that if you still want to read Hamlet now and it's in an EPUB format, the students ought to be aware of, all of the kind of layers of mediation in Shakespeare, from a Cordo to in the middle, probably the Signet paperback, very student-friendly with things that don't exist in the original play, like a Dramatis Personae list, up through the XML. And my way of doing this is, the next few slides are more kind of laugh and silly ones, but to try to defamiliarize interfaces by making students remember that interfaces are something that have been around before there was HCI and, sort of always been an issue. The idea of, using the language of affordances and apps and things. So, for instance, they all know the word crowdsourced, but the fact that medieval manuscripts were full of social commentary that accumulated over, not just months, but over decades, is something that, they can take away by realizing that these there's continuity as well as, their sense that everything's new around them. Here's a 18th century version of a playlist, right? A few Bible verses abstracted, these kinds of things. This one, obviously I didn't make this one up. This is the famous insight of Kittler at the beginning of his gramophone book about Nietzsche's typewriter and what it did to his writing style. So students came to see on the way to the last third of the class when we were doing projects that the tools shape our thoughts. So that was one part of it, and maybe in another slide or two, Megan and I together can say some things about how the librarians helped us here. But it was really the lab space was an opportunity for me to make the students think through some fundamentals and examine them. So for instance, little bits of big data approaches were done. This is, I've just cut this out of Peter Stallybrass's great article where he gives an example of, what happens when you keyword search Shakespeare against Ebo and things, right? It changes for students, their eyes popped out of their heads to realize that, he didn't just make up all the words out of nowhere and these phrases pre-existed him. They were also, given that we wanted to move them towards digital platforms, getting them to think about born digital as a category and as a thing that needs to be part of any future English major. So all the kinds of things that Matthew Kirschenbaum and so many others have been doing about thinking through born digital and then what you do to preserve things born digital. I gave them some examples from the visual arts. You can take any of Lev Manovich's many fascinating projects and sort of show them and get an example of bringing big data into cultural analysis. And for majors, we tried to find a way to do this, and this was where, do you want to say some things about this?
So to kind of do the technology training, we use Lynda Classroom, which is from the lynda.com gigantic suite of online technology training, and we asked them to do a course about cloud computing. And the reason for this is that our library, we don't have, system administrators and servers that we can kind of set everything up for everyone. So we really wanted to kind of teach them how to make a database in the cloud themselves. So that was a really interesting point. This wasn't me. I brought in other librarians. Our systems and applications librarian taught that piece and continues to be something of interest. So I thought I'd mention that.
Right. So so we had them. An API was built to query Twitter, and the students, according to what their final projects were going to be, could query it for keyword searches. And again, these are, for many of you sitting in this room, very basic now. But for our English majors, they really took it to heart to realize that there was a way that they could bring in the kinds of things that students in other fields would be learning, and that they hear about all the time. So, how does data get curated, and who does this, and how do they pull all these things, and actually got to do it with their own content, and it was pretty dramatic and fun. So, and then towards the end, they needed to build something. Or build's probably the wrong word, but design something. So a good bit of time, here's one of our other takeaways on this: don't assign 20 to 25 hours of Lynda videos, lynda.com videos to your students to try to make up gaps where all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, you need to know a lot about InDesign software, and we can't do it all in a 10-week quarter. Because as I learned myself, trying to watch them along with them, that much real-time video watching just kills your brain. So anyway, we tried that, and so we'll have to figure out ways to parcel out strategically, different parts of this rather than entire runs of training videos. And this is the thing where once we had this embedded into several courses over time, they could be 2 and 3 week units where different features of either InDesign software or some other thing for presentation moving works. So they had to design something, some kind of final project that would be both in an EPUB format and a PDF print format. Just again to think through the differences. There are different affordances. There's different things you can do in each platform. So some designed, like a poetry zine and things like that. There were many different ones. Not all of them were, much the first time through, so we'll have to figure out how to do this in the future. But, it was a chance, once again, for English majors to use some software. Finally, the takeaway is we want to find ways in a school like DePaul where there are few people in the humanities that are trained in digital humanities tools and methods right now, and we don't, frankly, don't have the prospect of hiring too many people in the near future immediately that bring a project to DePaul. So what can we do to get our students working on these things? So one was we look around and find ways to find a big project and then kind of parcel out work, right? So we're hoping for DePaul partners with the Chicago Public Library massive system of 280 some neighborhood branches to administer the One Book, One Chicago program. You've probably heard of, your city probably has a version of this itself where everyone reads the same book for certain seasons and has civic initiatives linked to it. So what we did is we're beginning a very big project, applied to the NEH for this and everything, taking people from all across the university to try to use some big data associated with libraries, with the Chicago Public Library's circulation, all appropriately anonymized and all that, but trying to tie together the city, civic initiatives. You can learn about reading, the reading platform. In other words, many books now are circulating as e-books or playaways and all these other formats that matter. And with the data, we should be able to not only map the circulation patterns, but down the road, we hope to be able to embed in with the Chicago Public Library system and actually work to kind of almost predict readership patterns and make sort of like experiments in a kind of digital humanities context. So we'll have, once we get some parameters for books that have been read in this There's been 25 so far since the fall of 2001. Once we get a sense of the kind of digital, what I'm calling digital signatures of these works, using text analysis, we'll be able to, predict how future ones will unfold over the city in real time, hopefully. So anyway, that takes a lot of doing and many people, and but it's the kind of thing that it's a way for, at least in our context, having DePaul's humanities departments like English partner with librarians, and it's been a very fruitful thing. So I guess.
Just quickly before the questions, I did want to mention on the training note, we definitely learned it was too many videos. I think in addition to that, it's hard to really get the training, even if you're doing it yourself and developing your own materials, narrowed down to the scope of everyone's individual project. And I think that's another theme I've kind of seen throughout the day that I've spent here. And so we struggled with that. We talked about, when designing the course, whether we should have the students come in and do scanning in our digitization lab. That was really hard to do. Like I mentioned, we use Content DM. Content DM is not the kind of system for librarians that are in the room and others that you can use in that way very easily with a group of students who are experimenting, because it makes changes in production and things like that. So those were interesting moments. But I think in terms of successes on the training, some of the students, it was very surprising to me how many of the students were not very interested in technology. Some of them mentioned that, and that this was something they knew was important, and they were interested in finding jobs in the market once they graduated, but they kind of were, really liked the book, the printed book, and that's why they studied literature. And that resonated with me. I was the same way, and that's why I studied literature as an undergraduate. But, technology happens to you, and it's hard to avoid. And so one of the things with the InDesign software, we chose that because we had the Adobe Suite on our campus already licensed, and it had some functionality with the EPUB format, and we could play around with that and try to, get them understanding some metadata formats. It was really, really difficult. It was difficult for me as well because of how powerful that tool is. But all of this, practically all of the students mentioned that is a particular software that they see on job descriptions. And it was very valuable to them to have had some skills just using InDesign. So I did want to mention that. Because we also put them through a lot of training on Photoshop, which was also interesting because they're people who enjoy analyzing and reading texts. And in Photoshop, we were really scanning images mostly. But they learned a lot, like when Professor Shanahan just showed some of the work from the art history world on kind of what's going on if you're going to visualize types of images, digital images, and using the histogram and all of that. That was another, I think, successful one. It was a little easier to teach. The training online was very focused. It was, by photographers, and it kind of worked for the quarter a little better than some of the other things we attempted. So.